For almost 2 years I had called the Tauros my command tank, but now it was roaring over these fields and rows, jumping off the ground, almost flipping half the time with the pace my driver was taking. I could see the church spire in Ceres. It was already visible in the distance over the stalks of grain that we just scythed down underneath the brow of the dune runner. I was so frustrated at the lack of information on the data slate I'd almost thrown it in the trash before I left the party. There was nothing there. Nothing but this mathematical computation scaled up by the astropaths to explain what they had actually seen. I kept thinking about how old the Tauros was and how loud the engine was screaming, thinking at any second the machine spirit of the ancient vehicle would give completely out, and I'd find myself sprinting the rest of the way to regimental headquarters. My blood was up. For the 5th time I read the report, there was only one paragraph and nothing to support it. Absolutely nothing. Jeffries, after receiving mobilization order after mobilization order and reading about gene stealer uprisings, Tau diplomatic forays, and these reports of Drakari raiding parties and everything else like it, I would have paid a Spire noble's ransom for anything more than the short paragraph that I got. The Tauros slammed hard enough into a ditch to nearly throw my hat off and myself out of the Tauros itself, but I didn't even look up from the data slate. The guardsman driving didn't even bother apologizing either. Neither of us had spoken. He hadn't even kissed his daughter goodbye as we left the party, topping out the speed of the Tauros before he even got out of sight. For the 9th time, I slapped the data slate down on my thigh rather than throw it out the side of the Tauros or snap it over my knee. The only information in it was that there was an expected breach of the Mandeville point that was going to occur in a few hours. No numbers, no records, nothing. Not even speculation. And that was the worst part, Jeffries. When the best information you have to go on is nothing, your mind will literally fly everywhere. The Tauros jumped and then started peeling out onto the main road, and my mind went through all the possibilities, but each one was just stranger than the last. When you have nothing for information, the best that you can do is start thinking about literally everything. And aside from me being able to completely dismiss the Tyranids because the warning came from outside the system, the Tyranids were all I could pull off the table. You know, Shadow and the Warp and everything else like that. At least I wasn't going to deal with those things again, and good thing too. I heard the sirens as my drivers took us into town, and I expected to see mass panic. But instead, the streets were almost deserted. I had spent years making comments about how this entire planet had less people in it than the half block I grew up in, and even though I was serious about it, right now, for me, Ceres looked like the definition of a ghost town. What did they know that I didn't know? 6 years of living on this planet, and I thought I knew them. I thought I understood them. Jeffries, it's amazing how dark your mind can go in minutes and how much you can forget. But right now, the best I thought of the population was that they were either huddled in their houses praying to the Emperor, and at worst, they were preparing to surrender themselves to whatever was coming and roll the dice. The tires locked up and squealed, and we just pulled into the converted warehouse that was my regimental headquarters, and I threw myself out of the chair of the Tauros. The driver looked my way, but he said nothing. And when his eyes met mine, I expected to see... What did I expect to see there, Jeffries? It wasn't what I got. And it stopped me in my tracks with the guardsmen looking at me, even as the sirens blared from these pole-mounted voxcasts that were spread throughout the town. We didn't even have a proper alarm for letting us know that stuff was coming in from outside the system. It was the weather alarms. That's what was blaring off the vox, but he just glared at me, and I glared right back at him, and his eyes said everything. And he was ready that whoever was coming was going to pay. And it was the first time since I read those words I felt strangely more secure. I snapped off the Aquila salute, and sitting in the Tauros, he copied the gesture. I made this show of crossing my arms behind my back, trying to affect the most confidence I could in my posture, everything. And I just started stalking towards the headquarters like I was irritated for having to be there in the first place. When I was walking in there, I remembered some of the lessons from the Schola. Never let emotion come through except in the heat of battle. Be a statue, be stoic, be this wall of certainty and strength no matter the odds. No matter how dire or just outright catastrophic the situation is, Jeffries, you have to be that rock your regiment can rally behind. You have to be the ideal. Even as I repeated those words in my head like a mantra, the only thing I wanted to do as I rounded the corner and saw the group that was assembled was begin violently grabbing people and shaking information out of them. So I walked into what barely passed for a war room, which was barely considered a conference room, with a holo display mounted on a table. I saw the back of Commander Vroll of the PDF and the regimental commander Thaddeus. Thaddeus is the one I was threatening to shoot all those times. The room itself was packed, but as soon as I was seen, they started calling out for me, and this way just parted in the center for just enough for me to move through. On the holo display, the Avalon system was displayed in bright green with the Mandeville point highlighted on the edge of the system. The Avathon Defense Flotilla, which is a mouthful of a title for the two-system defense craft Avathon had, were at the Mandeville point already, and they were just two little blips on the screen next to a large Aquila icon. I stepped up to the table and I looked at my left at the commanders of both the regiment and the PDF, then I put my data slate down on the table. Thaddeus was grin-faced, and I knew I was, but Vroll looked more nervous and jumpy. I didn't even think about it. In my mind, he was probably doing his best not to panic considering the circumstances. It's a thing. I walked in, and I knew before I even stepped foot in there that only with one war under my belt I had seen more combat than anyone else in the room, and all of them combined. Glancing around the table, I could see all these data slates being passed around. I could see the leader of the astropathic choir, and everybody just seemed to be doing a really good job of giving her as much space as possible. Off in another corner, I could see the red-robed tech priest of Mars. All four of them. Jeffries, there is very little on Avathon 4 that requires a tech priest. I adjusted to this planet. I could only imagine how the Mechanicus had even attempted to deal with this assignment. Thaddeus tapped my shoulder. He passed me a data slate. Other slates were offered, and I just started grabbing them and devouring the contents as fast as I could manage. Everything was so tense, Jeffries. It was thick. I could feel the weight pressing on my chest. I can feel it even now thinking about it. No one really even spoke. No one was leading a meeting. The only things that were said were the essentials. No one knew what was coming or why. No one knew what was going to translate or how the astropaths had even determined what was happening. If they have a better way of explaining it, their leader was being awfully quiet about it. I don't really mind psychers all that much, Jeffries. I never have had an issue with them. But I can definitely understand why some do. So I grabbed another data slate and I started flicking the reports. Speculation about orcs, about Eldar, about the Jakari, and another species called the Zefru. There were one or two reports citing possible chaos incursion, but I had almost dismissed that entirely as well. Another one I dismissed entirely were the reports on the Tau. No one had even brought up the Tyranids. All around the table, and the room for that matter, eyes kept turning toward the icon that marked the Mandeville point. I heard a Vox speaker crackle from a rafter overhead, and this woman kept on giving reports. It was one of the defense ships. The conversation went around and around the table, and I just began to tune it out. It was pointless. It was absolutely pointless to guess whatever was going to translate into the system until it actually translated. I looked back down to my own data slate, and I began to just flick my finger against the screen, just looking through report after report, trying to figure out anything. I had been silent since I stepped in the door, and now I was rereading reports that had been coming in for years, trying to just get anything. And then I flicked my finger across the screen to the mobilization report that came in right before the one that told me that we were the target. Ikvar 4. I began scanning through the mobilization reports, noticing something, but I couldn't just put my finger on it. I couldn't understand what I was seeing, but Jeffries, when that coin dropped, I felt it. Without even asking for permission, I just interrupted everyone's conversation and took control of the system map with my terminal, right there on the holo display. Conversation just stopped. I just began working the terminal, just zooming out, then out again until I could see Ikvar 4. And no one really said anything. They just waited for me to speak, but I wasn't talking. My eyes went back to my data slate. My fingers went to the terminal, inputting each system one at a time. Civil war, gene stealer incursion, possible chaos cultist, civil unrest, a small orc warband, more gene stealers. I input just the planetary ID, 6 years of collective mobilization reports, all of which Avathon 4 had not been called up for. My fingers moved. There was something here, and like a blind man using his fingers to see, I used the terminal, Delta Tau, Graulia, the entire of the Vistion system, Radnar. The list went on and on and on. And then everybody else started to get it too. I heard these intakes of breath and curses as just realization began to kick in, and I just started to feel this dense core of just ice water in the pit of my stomach. And when I pressed that final keystroke, I looked up. I had zoomed all the way out to show the outer edge of the Sagittarius arm without even really just noticing it at all. And lancing right through the stars that comprised it, I had put out this brilliant field of green. Highlighted systems from 6 years of reports, all of which pointed like a spear through the heart of the Sagittarius arms right to the Ikar system. Everyone just stared at the holo display. No one even spoke. And then I looked to my left and Thaddeus was reaching down and he pressed a few buttons on his own terminal. I looked past him and Vrol was sweating. The PDF commander looked like he was about to pass out, Jeffries. And I didn't blame him. Thaddeus was displaying the dates of last recorded communications, and this dark cloud just seemed to fall over everyone. For almost what seemed like this eternity, we just stared in silence at the holo display. No one had mentioned the Tyranids. No one had even considered them Jeffries because it was 989 and 41. Eventually, we'd have a name for the reason behind almost every mobilization report we received, and not just the past 6, but the past 12 years. Kraken. High Fleet Kraken. The entire room seemed to erupt in this noise and this just commotion, but I stayed staring at that screen. We were close, relatively speaking, but we weren't close enough. The Avathon system sat snug to the galactic south of Bremlock. We were weeks, if not months, away from warp travel, from even the most furthest edge of the line of advance. We weren't close enough for that threat, but we were close enough to another. When I realized half the room was looking my way and everybody was getting silent again, I knew I had said my thoughts out loud, so I just repeated myself, and slowly, it's the Tau. And just like that, it was almost like I summoned them. The Vox operator from the system edge called out and threw a switch, and as I stared at the holo display, I heard distorted screaming, klaxons, and these sounds of battle that was over before it had even gotten started, and then nothing but static hiss. Jeffries, no one needed to be told that the flotilla was dead already. I remember just how silent it got. And then the holo display began to make this whirring noise as it just recentered itself on the Avathon system display. The readout from the last Auspex sweep had been sent, and these icons began to just pop into the screen, and it took every bit of my resolve not to spit on the table. My teeth started grinding as I just heard these these intakes of breath, these gasps and these curses and just whispers all around the room. What was coming, Jeffries? It was overkill. Town naval symbols began to flick on the screen, and everybody just started shouting and talking over each other. An explorer battleship, 2 merchant cruisers, and I stopped caring before I even started counting the escorts. Runes began to flash across the screen. I just curled my hands behind my back and I tightened the fists. My mind started racing. I just looked at the screen. While the Imperium was distracted, the Tau had come and they were bringing enough not just to take the planet, but they were going to hold it. But Jeffries, this was not their way. Back then, just like any other Commissar being deployed to that section of the galaxy, you read the reports on the Tau. This was not how they did things. Nothing in this matched the reports. There was months, if not years, of subversion with those in positions of power turned to their stupid cause. I hadn't in 6 years heard of a single visit from a Watercast diplomat or anything of the sort. Throne knows I would have met the Xenos myself if only to put a bolter in their face with instructions to leave the Emperor's domain. This was back before I really understood them. I turned away from the screen and I looked over the room to distance myself from the situation, to try to think clearly. The force they were bringing, it was obvious they wanted this over fast and they didn't want a protracted engagement, but direct invasion, that was just not their way. Even with a world population as small as this one, they would have at least turned... Vroll was gone. I blinked and then snapped my head to where he'd been standing only a few seconds before. Commander Vroll was not in the room. He was gone. I spun around. My eyes started looking around the room. Ice water hits my veins and it chills my blood until it just starts running cold in my heart. Jeffries, there's no sign of him. There's no sign of him. My eyes are looking around. The noise of the command center just dulls into a roar. I know, Jeffries. I know! The regimental commander's looking at me. He's nervous. My eyes are wide. I'm breathing hard. I'm the center of attention now. Everybody's looking at me, but I'm looking everywhere else. My stomach lurches. I can see what's about to happen. The Mage's Tech Magos, the regiment's entire command staff, most of the civil defense staff, the leader of the Astropaths, all in this room. And right there, standing at the end of the table, crying as he looks at the holo display, at the war that is to come as the planetary governor. Every major player in the defense of this world is standing here, now, in this room. Clear the room! I yell it as I grab hold of the collar of the regimental commander. I'm yanking them, half dragging them out the door. Jeffries? Jeffries? I feel heat. And when? Am I alive? Am I alive? Pain. Nothing but pain. I have to get up. Move, damn it, move. I can't hear. I can't hear. I grab hold of Thaddeus's coat. I gotta get him out. But my feet won't stay. I can't get up. The pain! I see figures coming through the smoke. Voices. Traitors coming to make sure the job is done. Damn it, Commissar, move your ass! Visions going. Hands are coming. Traitors! I'm being dragged by both arms. I can't take control of myself. Fight back! Voices shouting. My eyes are barely open. I see guns everywhere. Sunlight. I see how it is now. Drag a symbol of Imperial authority and execute them in broad daylight for the whole fucking world to see. I'd spit on them if I could lift my fucking head. I'd piss on them for the traitor swine they are. What are they saying? Who are they? I'm being put in the Tauros. By civilians? I taste water, and it's cold water. My attention's coming back. I look around. I shake my head. I'm trying to clear this fog that tries to close in on me. I'm trying not to pass out. This woman leans over me, and I'm half slumped in the passenger seat of the Tauros. I hear her call out for others, and I'm looking at her. My ears, they're just finally stopping that ringing, and I can focus. She hands me another cup of water, and I drink it, and only then do I notice the guardsman who drove me, and he's on the shortwave Vox, and he's talking. He looks relieved, and he's telling whoever's listening that I'm alive. I reach out and I grab the Vox transmitter. Get 2 squads and get to the astropathic wire! I scream into the receiver, and I can't believe how hoarse I sound. Evacuate them if they're still alive, and if anyone sees Commander Vril, shoot him on sight! I almost collapse back in the chair, and I only yank myself up. I almost instantly fall over. Thaddeus, I have to see if Thaddeus is still alive. I feel an arm slide underneath me, and I see the eyes again. There they are. And I'm throwing my arm around the shoulder of their owner. Myself and the guardsmen, we move back to the smoking ruin of the regimental headquarters. I can't believe it. My eyes are just wide, just for a second, before I get control of myself as I see just the scale of the destruction, and I just focus in again. I start glancing around, and I almost draw my bolt gun on reflex when I see how many armed civilians are around us until I see them running into the building. I squeeze hold of the guardsman's shoulders and I stop moving, and I just set my jaw because I see bodies. I recognize what was once Thaddeus. It's just pieces. I see what looks to be this broken toy laying a few feet away from what's left of him, and it's the tech majors, Jeffries. I honestly don't know, and I never have figured out how I wasn't lying right there with them. Have they pulled anyone else out alive? I ask, and I actually succeed in making the question as natural as possible. The guardsman points, and I see an acolyte of the machine god staring out into the street below at this growing crowd of armed civilians. Thrown at the amount of them, and all of them with weapons either slung over shoulder or bared, but surprisingly, and thank the throne, none of them were pointed at me. Typically, Jeffries, you're warned at least 50 times at the Schola to watch out for any signs of treachery inside your regiment. In almost every case recorded, the first one to be killed if a regiment or world starts to turn against their oaths, that would be the Commissar. As soon as the blast went off, I I was convinced anyone coming out of that smoke was coming to finish off where the bomb had started. I pulled my way away from the guardsman, and I half walk, half limped over to the red-robed acolyte that was still alive. Are you injured, tech priest? The adept was young, shockingly young. He was barely modified in the way the cog boys tend to do to themselves. He just had a lone mechadendrite coiled around his waist. He couldn't be more than 20 standard Terran years.
No, I am operational. I am not damaged,
he mutters. I would only learn after years of knowing him that the Magos, as well as 2 others, had been standing between him and the blast and had absorbed nearly all of it. We didn't have time to count our blessings on this, though. If my own arrival from the Mandeville point when I translated a system all those years ago had been any judge, we only had 4 days until the Tau would be able to start landing troops. Tech priest!
Phasian. I am called Phasian, Commissar.
The acolyte interrupts me, but he's still staring at the same spot he had before I even stepped near him. Tech priest Phasian. He turns to me, and I just remember the look in his eye. He looked as stunned as I felt.
What happened in there, Commissar?
He says it more than he asks, and he gestures with his head back toward the fire and the smoke to the building that's burning down behind us. We both look. Civilians and more members of the regiment who are showing up are running in and out of the building. Some are coming out coughing, others are coming out in tears, and others are dragging what's left of the people that were in there. I take a breath and I steady myself and I wall myself off from all of it. Apparently, Commander Vroll of the PDF has turned traitor, and judging by the fact we aren't knee-deep in PDF troopers gunning everyone down, his list of allies is short. Thank him on Terra for that. I tell that to the young acolyte and I pause before I continue. He intended to decapitate the planet. I didn't bother telling the tech priest that the treacherous bastard had been successful. Why state the obvious?
Oh.
That was the only reply I got from the tech priest. We stood in silence for a few minutes, actually. We have 4 days, Phasian. I didn't know what else to tell him.
What is needed?
Phasian asked. His voice was flat, and I noticed his gaze just had come to rest on the tech magos. I looked down at my own self, and I'm seeing it for the first time. I see all the burn marks and ash on my greatcoat, on my sash, and I start trying to brush it off, but it won't come off. I look up and I see the looks on the civilians' faces. I expected fear, Jeffries. I expected anxiety. Maybe I even expected people to be glancing my way, getting these funny little ideas in their head. Did they know what we were going to be facing? When the town demanded surrender, how many of them would throw down their weapons? But I couldn't believe it when I looked at their faces. All I saw was just pure anger, Jeffries. That's the only thing that I can say. Pure, white-hot anger. Even the people that were sobbing almost hysterically. The look on their face. I didn't think it was possible. What is needed? I repeated the words the tech priest had said to me. A place to coordinate outside the city would be a really good start. I suddenly hear a lot of shouting from my left, and I turn my head, and I look down one of the side streets. There's a man being dragged by the feet out of the side of a civilian transport truck, quite literally kicking and screaming by 2 of my troopers, and he was being followed by a growing mass of pissed-off-looking civilians. All I could do was sneer.
You'll have it.
Phasian still just stood there motionless, but I was already stalking towards my troopers. I recognized my troopers, Holo and Viserius, but my eyes were on the uniformed form of the PDF commander, Commander Vroll, whose uniform was now much worse for wear. I yanked my bolter out of its holster, flipping the safety off. Vroll was shouting curses as he was being dragged up until the point he saw me, and I must have cut quite the sight. I hadn't seen myself in the mirror yet, Jeffries. Blood was caked on my face like a mask. My greatcoat was covered in ash and the gore of those that had been in the room with me. Holo and Viserius stopped a few feet away and they just dropped him like a sack of potatoes on the ground.
Astropathic Choir was secured. Some of the boys were already there trying to get some word.
Holo finished his report and looked at Vroll.
Jarek had the Vox on. Right when you said to secure the choir, look who shows up in a speeder!
Viserius then just motioned to the truck they had pulled the PDF commander from.
And we got the lasgun and a few frag grenades he got out of the speeder back there.
I believe my order was to shoot him! I glared down at Vroll. Vroll was breathing hard, holding up his hand as if he could ward me off.
Let me explain.